City of Heroes was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game based on the superhero comic book genre, developed by Cryptic Studios and published by NCSOFT. The game was launched in North America on April 27, 2004, and in Europe on February 4, 2005, with English, German and French language servers. 23 free major updates for City of Heroes were released before its shutdown, with a nearly finished 24th update able to be played on the game's beta server. The final live update, Where Shadows Lie, was released on May 31, 2012. On August 31, 2012, NCSoft terminated its Paragon Studios development team, ending all production on COH with the last day of services on November 30, 2012. In the game, players created super-powered player characters that could team up with others to complete missions and fight criminals belonging to various gangs and organizations in the fictional Paragon City. Production history. On October 31, 2005, the game's first sequel, City of Villains, was launched, allowing players to play as supervillains. Initially dubbed as an expansion alone by the developers, the game did not require COH to run, but if the user had both games, content was added to the COH side of gameplay. On July 16, 2008, NCSoft merged the two games' content together. Thus, a player who only owned City of Heroes could now play City of Villains, and vice versa. Prior to this, a purchase was required to access either game's content, but they were linked by one account and subscription fee. On November 6, 2007, NCSoft announced their purchase of the COH intellectual property and transitioned the staff from Cryptic Studios to a new location in Mountain View, California, to continue development of the game. The new studio on April 14, 2009, became Paragon Studios, which shared credit with Cryptic Studios for the development work. This then led to City of Heroes becoming available for download on Steam, along with other NCSoft titles, on April 22, 2009. On October 30, 2008, NCSoft announced a partnership with Transgaming Technologies in order to bring both City of Heroes and City of Villains and all 13 expansions to Mac OS X. The City of Heroes Going Rogue expansion's release was announced on May 11, 2009. This part of the game centered on the alternate reality of Pretoria and featured a new alignment system allowing players' characters to shift allegiances between heroes and villains, giving characters access to both Paragon City of COH and the Rogue Isles of COV. Paragon Studios described this as exploring the shades of grey that lay between heroes and villains. Going Rogue was released on August 17, 2010, with pre-purchases able to play on August 16. On June 20, 2011, Paragon Studios announced that they were going to switch to a hybrid subscription model called City of Heroes Freedom, adding in a free-to-play game model. Special models for former subscribers would be termed premium players, and current subscribers would become VIP players, who would gain access to all the content in the various upcoming game updates. On August 31, 2012, Paragon Studios announced that it was being closed, and City of Heroes would cease all billing immediately and begin the process of shutting down the service. The stated explanation for this move was a realignment of company focus and publishing support. November 30, 2012, was listed as the official shutdown date of the game, and the servers were turned off at midnight PST. Many players arrived en masse to express their continued protest, support, and fond farewells, including messages of gratitude from the developers and moderators thanking their fans for their support and passion for the game. A variety of efforts got underway, led by players of the game, to keep the game operating past the announced date of closure. Ultimately, their efforts were unsuccessful, and the game shut down as scheduled. Missing Worlds Media's president Nate Downs announced in September 2014 that he was interested in reviving the game's intellectual property, which might enable the final version of the game to be released. Gameplay. After creating their character and selecting a name, players could either begin play in an isolated tutorial zone, or skip the tutorial and begin in an open low-level zone. A character's level increased by earning experience points from defeating foes, completing missions, and exploring zones, then returning to an NPC known as a trainer. Benefits for rising in level included more health, more powers to choose for the character, more slots to allocate enhancements to powers, and larger inventories for inspirations and salvage. If a player loses all of their health, they could be revived through use of an item, by an ally's powers, or in one of the hospitals on the map. Reviving in a hospital after a certain level incurred experience debt, which made gaining additional experience more difficult. The setting of the game of Paragon City for Heroes was divided into different zones by giant energy war walls, which were justified in the backstory. Especially dangerous zones called Hazard or Trial zones, which teamed with larger groups of enemies, were marked in red on the in-game map and were much more dangerous than normal zones. The villains' setting, the Rogue Isles, consisted of islands connected by a network of ferries and helicopters. A few zones were accessible to both heroes and villains, some were cooperative zones, while others were player versus player zones. Pretoria, for characters created in the Going Rogue update, lacked war walls, allowing more or less free movement between areas. Players initially moved around the zones by jogging or using a minor speed-increasing power such as sprint. As heroes grew in level and accumulated more powers, they could choose among 4 higher speed traveling powers: teleportation, super speed, super jumping, and flight. As characters leveled up, players could choose new powers from the character's primary and secondary power sets, as set during creation, or from shared power pools. The power pools contained the 4 travel powers and other generic, usually utilitarian, powers that fell under categories such as fitness, concealment, and leadership. In addition, as characters leveled up, they gained access to new costume features, including the ability to change between up to 5 costumes and unlockable costume parts such as capes and auras. Quests in the game were known as missions, and were obtained through various channels, generally from various NPCs the player met in the game. Although missions could be completed alone, the player had the option to form teams with other player characters to play off of each other's characters' strengths and abilities. The level of the characters used, size of the team, and a separate difficulty scale chosen by the player called notoriety, all affected the difficulty of the mission. Missions could take the form of an instanced area where the player must defeat a boss, save NPC characters held hostage, or search the instance for a certain object or number of objects, while other missions required that players defeat a certain number and type of mobs, possibly in a defined area of the game. Some missions are part of story arcs that involve the player in a larger narrative that tells some of the backstory of the setting. Task forces, strike forces, and trials were particular missions that could be completed multiple times, but only as part of a team, and had to be completed in entirety to earn particular rewards for completion, such as the ability to re-specify a character's chosen powers and enhancements. Cooperative play also took the form of larger clans called supergroups, a reminiscent of comic book groups such as the Justice League, the Avengers, or the Brotherhood of Mutants. Players part of supergroups could team up together or convene in bases. Bases were used for social meeting or housing special items used in crafting inventions, serving as a collective item vault, or to recover after losing all health in the overworld. Supergroups in turn could form coalitions with each other for increased collaborations. Coalitions were generally formed for the raids featured in the game. Another form of cooperative play was the sidekick feature, which allowed for characters of disparate experience levels to participate in the game together. A sidekick's experience level would be temporarily risen to be close to their partner's level, and their health and strength would be scaled to their artificial level, while any experience or influence they gained was scaled to their original level. A reverse feature known as Exemplar was added later, which artificially lowered the level of a higher-level character, but they earn experience at their original level, which is useful in removing debt, or gains influence rather than experience. For the release of City of Villains, these features are Lackey and Malefactor. Issue 16 overhauled the system such that it was automatically scaled to the anchor, which was either the player on the team whose mission the team was set to perform or the team's leader. Players could also set leveling pacts, which allowed two players to sync up the experience their characters gained, although this was disabled in a later update. Other game features included auction houses and crafting inventions to make characters more powerful or unlock further costume options. The Architect release gave players the ability to construct custom mission arcs, with customized enemies and layouts that could then be played by all other players. The Going Rogue expansion allowed players to switch their alignment using tip missions collected from defeated enemies. Character creation. In character creation, the player first selected a character's origin and archetype, then primary and secondary power sets. Next, the actual avatar with its costume was created. Then the player had a choice of customizing the colors of his/her powers. Lastly, the player chose a name and could optionally write a background story to add some flavor to the character, as well as creating an individual battle cry. There were 5 origins a player could choose for his/her character that dictated what type of enhancements the character may use, affected which single short-ranged power they begin with, and influenced the various enemy groups that the character went up against. These origins were as follows. Natural powers obtained through training the body, weapons, or inherent abilities if the character is not human, such as Superman and the Kingpin. Magic powers obtained through a magic item, magical spells, or a mystical being, such as Zatanna and Doctor Strange. Science powers obtained through some sort of scientific means, whether intentionally or accidentally, such as the Flash or Spider-Man. Mutation powers obtained through a change in genetics, manifesting at any point in their life, such as the X-Men or Killer Croc. Technology powers obtained through highly advanced technology, such as Cyborg or Iron Man. A special, incarnate, origin was programmed for various NPCs in the game and who obtained powers from the fictional Well of the Furies. The incarnate system, which added additional powers for the player to choose from after completing difficult missions. There were 5 basic hero archetypes, which affected a character's power choices and team role throughout the game. Blasters were versatile damage dealers, capable of fighting at short or long range against one or many opponents, but had relatively little health. Controllers were adept at preventing enemies from moving or acting through inducing status effects, as well as possessing pet summons. Defenders turned the tide of battle with weakening enemy attacks and ally strengthening. Scrappers were melee fighters with a greater chance of critical hits against tough opponents such as bosses. Tankers possessed great defenses and the ability to take hits for the team, as well as powers to adjust aggro towards them. There were also 5 basic villain archetypes. Brutes dealt increasing damage as they attacked or were themselves attacked. Corruptors could cause damage at range, with high chance for critical hits against wounded targets. Dominators assailed enemies with status effects and direct damage. Masterminds summoned, upgraded, and controlled combat pets. Stalkers were stealthy fighters, dealing critical hits when hidden or when accompanied by a team. There were also 2 epic hero archetypes which were unlocked after reaching level 20 with another hero character. Peacebringers were peaceful symbiotic aliens that had light-based powers. Warshades were warlike symbiotes that were normally enemies to the Peacebringers but had reformed their evil ways. Both archetypes were capable of shapeshifting into a more offensive or more defensive form. The villain side mirrored this, with two branching villain archetypes which were unlocked after reaching level 20 with another villain character. Both are rank-and-file soldiers for the villainous group Arachnus, attempting to make a name for themselves, each with two distinct specializations. With issue 21, players could now create a character and go through a tutorial involving the destruction of Galaxy City by Shavants that allowed them to choose their alignment, such as a heroic corruptor or a villainous blaster. Heroes went to Paragon City, and villains went to the Rogue Isles. Characters created with Going Rogue started the game in Pretoria, and chose whether to be a loyalist, who followed Emperor Cole, or to be in the Resistance, who opposed him. In Pretoria, however, things were not so black and white. There were good and evil people on both sides, and, when leaving Pretoria at level 20, players could choose their character to be either a hero or a villain. The alignment could also be changed later on, allowing for heroes to go vigilante before becoming villains or villains to become rogues before being redeemed as heroes. Virtual rewards. Similarly to other MMORPGs, City of Heroes, villains had various items that were rewarded within the game. However, many of these items were described as intangible or otherworldly, such as inspirations, or INF, which were abstract ideas in the real world. Enhancements, slottable attribute boosts, also covered a range of ideas and items from magic enchantments to technological gadgets to training techniques. With the release of issue 6, while in supergroup mode, a setting that could be toggled on and off, players accumulated prestige points which were used to improve the supergroup base. Issue 9 brought the invention system to the game, which allowed characters to combine other dropped items they salvaged and recipes to create various goods. Invented enhancements could provide better bonuses than normal enhancements, including set bonuses for slotting invented enhancements from the same set into the same power. Costume pieces and limited-use temporary powers could also be invented. In addition to these, there were also collectible badges for players to earn, gained for performing various actions in-game. Most served no functional purpose for players, except to provide characters with taglines under their character names. However, a few, called accolades, gave players access to temporary powers and permanent bonuses to health and endurance and were gained by collecting other badges. Players also had the option of purchasing a vast array of items on the Paragon Market, introduced with City of Heroes. Freedom. The Paragon Market was a cash shop wherein players could purchase, for example, power sets, costume sets, temporary powers and boosts, character renames and respects, extra costume slots, and access to game content to which they might not normally have access. The currency used on the Paragon Market was Paragon points, which were either purchased with real money through the market or awarded as bonuses for VIP subscribers. Enemies. In City of Heroes there were multiple NPC groups that players fought as part of random encounters. Many enemies were found on the streets of Paragon City and the Rogue Isles, whereas others were found in specific instances or areas. There were also giant monsters and zone events that took place in parts of the city that were even more uncommon, such as Lusker the giant octopus in the waters of the Independence Port Zone or the ghost of Scrapyard that wanders through Sharkhead Isle. Setting. The setting of City of Heroes was the fictional Paragon City, located in Rhode Island in the United States. The city was divided into several smaller neighborhoods that had varying enemies and progressively higher levels of enemies within them. The arbitrary divisions between zones are explained in-game by the presence of walls, powerful force fields derived from alien technology which were used to defend various areas of the city. Heroes set out by dealing with low-powered street gangs in the initial zones, working their way up to fighting increasingly dangerous threats, such as organized crime, corrupt corporations, hostile aliens, and supernatural terrors, even eventually entering other dimensions to fight supremely powerful enemies. The setting of City of Villains was the Rogue Isles, a fictitious group of islands off the eastern coast of the United States. There, under the watchful gaze of Lord Recluse and the Arachnus organization, prospective villains fought to make a name for themselves, seizing any opportunity that presented itself. The setting of the Going Rogue expansion was Pretoria, a parallel dimension version of Paragon City where the world was ravaged by Hammond and his devouring Earth legions, and only Emperor Marcus Cole managed to bring stability to a world ravaged by the Hammond Wars. Superpowered individuals living in Pretoria begin as Praetors, working for Emperor Cole, but decide to either join the Loyalist faction and remain a member of the Praetorian Armed Police Force, or join the Resistance and attempt to reveal the corruption of Emperor Cole and free humanity from his rule.